Okay, so you've created our animation and you're ready for output. Now, there are a couple of things I like to do before final output of a project. First thing is just clean up the entire After Effects project. So let's go ahead and collapse the graphics folder here in the project panel and go to our workspace and make sure that we're set in the standard workspace. And if your standard workspace looks a little funny, make sure you go ahead and reset it to the standard layout. Now, in order to render this, all we need to do is make sure our training swoosh comp is active by clicking Training Solution in the timeline. And then we can go to Composition, Add to Render Queue. I'm going to move my render queue up into my composition panel. So let's click the little grippies to the left of the words render queue and just drag up until we get that purple rectangle in the top of my comp panel. So there are a couple of different settings we need to go through. The render settings are set to best. If we go ahead and click on the words render settings, you can see this is where I could adjust the overall size of the project. Now I want to leave it set to full resolution, so it will render is 1280 by 720. I could also adjust my fill settings if I need to. Or if I only wanted to render a specific area within the work area, I could specify a custom setting over here. It's automatically going to render the entire duration of everything because my work area is set to the entire length of the composition. So we'll just go ahead and click Cancel, since the default settings seem to work perfectly well. Now if I click on the output module settings, in here I could output a Photoshop file or a TIFF sequence. I want to leave the lossless setting in here, but I'm going to go ahead and click on the word lossless to open up the different module settings. In here by default it's going to render a QuickTime file because I am now on Mac. If you're on Windows, it may very well default to Windows Media. Now we can leave the default settings because that will be a lossless codec. Animation is one of the easiest codecs and it's installed on every computer that has QuickTime installed. So I'm going to leave animation set up. I don't want any audio to render, so I'm just going to change my audio settings to audio output off and then click OK. So now we can go to the output 2 settings, go ahead and just click on the words training swoosh and let's rename the file from training swoosh to bumper and then click save. I just saved it to my desktop. Now obviously you can save yours wherever you prefer on your computer. Now that's going to give me a full resolution file. Now what if I want to upload something to the web or a different codec or something like that? That's when I would consider using Adobe Media Encoder. And that's a whole different process in itself. So I definitely suggest you watch the Adobe Media Encoder section later on towards the end of this title. Let's say I just wanted to create something in about half the size of what I'm working with right now. What I'm going to do is click this little plus button next to the Output 2 option. When I do that, it's going to add yet another output module. So here, let's click on the word lossless. In here I have an option where I can resize this render. So I'm going to go ahead and click resize and I will make sure to lock aspect ratio to set up and go ahead and resize it to a width of 800. And when I press tab, it'll make it 800 by 450. Now obviously you can choose whatever setting you want, if you wanted it smaller or what have you. If I want to change the codec, I could click on format options here and choose a different codec, say H.264 or something like that. I could do that here as well. I'll actually go ahead and just choose H.264 and then click OK. So this is going to be a smaller version at H.264. Now obviously if you have Windows Media you may want to choose one of the Windows Media codec. So now when I click OK I'm going to go ahead and render this. But instead of rendering one version of the file it's going to render 2, and actually let's change the name of this as well. I'm going to click on the words training swoosh and say bumper small and click save. Now when we go ahead and render, it's only going to render once, but it's actually going to render 2 separate files at the same time. So it's going to take just a second to go ahead and render, and when it's rendered, I'm just going to jump here to my desktop. So I'll minimize my project, and here, if I double click on the bumper, you can see I have a full resolution QuickTime that's been rendered. So there's my full resolution version. That's awesome, and I can go ahead and close that. But if I double click on the bumper small version, now I've created a smaller version as well. That's also H.264. And that was all created with one render just by using multiple output settings.